With the internet shook with near 100% confirmation that Space Godzilla will be the next villain in the monsterverse, one can only begin to wonder how exactly Space Godzilla will look like in this cinematic universe. Today on Goji Center, we'll show what we think Space Godzilla could look like and what abilities will translate from the original Heisei Space Godzilla to our current era. A quick reminder that all of the content you're about to see is pure speculation. We won't be referencing any potential plot leaks today as well. Hit that subscribe button and stay till the end to witness Goji Center's take on Cosmic Gojira. Here in our analysis platform, we will begin with the base model of monsterverse Godzilla. More specifically, the one introduced to us back in 2019 in King of the Monsters. Although, canonically speaking, first seen in 2015 with these new dorsals. We'll be editing this base model into the Space Godzilla we think might show up in the movie. But first, let's very quickly recap the Heisei version of Space Godzilla to see what translates into this new universe, or what's just plain silly. Space Godzilla stands at 120 meters in height and 80,000 metric tons, but it comes in many forms. 260 meters in flying form, encased in an extremely heavy array of quartz crystal, weighing at a whopping 720 tons. The penultimate foe for Godzilla in the Heisei era has some really trippy origins that you really need to pay attention to as we get more info about Space Godzilla in the future. It is mentioned in the film that this cosmic horror was made after Godzilla-like DNA was released into outer space. Either one, after Biollante was destroyed in a previous film, some of its remains floated into outer space. The second scenario involved Godzilla remains attached to Mothra's body after she flew to space to intercept a meteor. These particles would have entered a black hole and exposed to the extreme radiation of a supernova. Maybe not so coincidentally, the exact subtitle for the next MonsterVerse film. Things are making a lot of sense already. This cosmic version of Godzilla would make its way back to Earth almost as an equivalent of an anti-type force. The agenda: destroy his counterpart on planet Earth so that it would be defenseless and open a path for conquest. This is exactly the same trope we've seen in the monsterverse time and time again. In 2014, had the Mutos successfully defended their offspring, this would have unleashed a world-ending cataclysm that would have terraformed the world to their own liking. Ghidorah being an actual living storm, using other kaiju to do his bidding, destroying Earth. Scar King taking over the surface world, and the list can continue on and on at this rate, especially with Space Godzilla exhibiting the same intentions. With the telekinesis, see a version of Space Godzilla to see what translates into this new universe, or what's just plain silly. Space Godzilla stands at 120 meters in height and 80,000 metric tons, but it comes in many forms. 260 meters in flying form, encased in an extremely heavy array of quartz crystal, weighing at a whopping 720 tons. The penultimate foe for Godzilla in the Heisei era has some really trippy origins that you really need to pay attention to as we get more info about Space Godzilla in the future. It is mentioned in the film that this cosmic horror was made after Godzilla-like DNA was released into outer space. Either one, after Biollante was destroyed in a previous film, some of its remains floated into outer space. The second scenario involved Godzilla remains attached to Mothra's body after she flew to space to intercept a meteor. These particles would have entered a black hole and exposed to the extreme radiation of a supernova. Maybe not so coincidentally, the exact subtitle for the next MonsterVerse film. Things are making a lot of sense already. This cosmic version of Godzilla would make its way back to Earth almost as an equivalent of an anti-type force. The agenda: destroy his counterpart on planet Earth so that it would be defenseless and open a path for conquest. This is exactly the same trope we've seen in the monsterverse time and time again. In 2014, had the Mutos successfully defended their offspring, this would have unleashed a world-ending cataclysm that would have terraformed the world to their own liking. Ghidorah being an actual living storm, using other kaiju to do his bidding, destroying Earth. Scar King taking over the surface world, and the list can continue on and on at this rate, especially with Space Godzilla exhibiting the same intentions. Space Goji wouldn't be able to take over the planet without the appropriate tools of the trade. For this, you need a lot of energy. Again, every single one of the villains discussed needed vast amounts of energy to succeed in this difficult endeavor. Muto's always looking for radioactive material, Ghidorah absorbing energy from both geologic and human-made sources, Mechagodzilla being at his most powerful form from Hollow Earth energy replications, the Scar King harnessing the power of Shimo, and Space Godzilla will almost certainly use these. These structures, commonly referred to as a crystal fortress, was a network of sharp, jagged crystalline structures that served as a power grid for Space Godzilla. At this point in the video, we're starting to creep into explaining some serious firepower this fella brings to the battlefield. So, which of these will transfer to the monsterverse? The answer might surprise you, despite the seemingly ungrounded abilities Space Godzilla had. Perhaps the strangest ability Space Godzilla wielded in the original film was telekinesis, and this came in many forms. It was observed that this monster could lift objects, even itself, in the air without the use of any physical object. This, known as the gravity tornado, was visualized as a green energy stream that hovered around Godzilla as it raised from the ground. Apart from lifting kaiju, Space Godzilla would lift and hurl other objects, such as these crystals, to use them as projectiles, the equivalent of giant harpoons launched across the battlefield against any opponent. Additionally, we must add that Space Godzilla wielded other kinds of forces, such as photon hurricanes. These circular electromagnetic blasts were the ones that initially interfered with the giant mech aircraft known as Moguera, rendering its navigation systems useless and disorienting the crew. Even more strange were the abilities of Space Godzilla to create force fields around itself and other structures. These photoreactive shields were the handiwork of, once again, Space Godzilla's ability to manipulate matter to do its bidding. Are some of these abilities too outlandish for the monsterverse? We were going to say yes, but after further digging, not really. We're very soon going to be talking about the physical appearance of Space Godzilla in the monsterverse, but we are really quickly going to settle the debate on whether or not gravity manipulation can exist in this cinematic universe. It already happened. Yes, indeed, and here are a couple examples. Recall in Godzilla X Kong: The New Empire, the Iwi civilization had already found a way to manipulate gravity, though perhaps not to the extent that Space Godzilla does it. To recap, during the Hollow Earth battle sequence in Malenka, the Iwi had activated levers that raised two crystalline pyramids to touch each other in the center, temporarily negating the effects of the inverted gravitational forces, making anything that was currently in the vicinity float in free space. The origin of such phenomena was a form of crystal here, and pyramids might have something to do here, since it was confirmed in the title release trailer that pyramids still will have an important role here. Space Godzilla's use of crystal structures could definitely be the reason why we might once again see gravity manipulation happen. But what about its ability to actually control the trajectory of objects? Are we walking into uncharted territory in the monsterverse? Once again, no. There is another kaiju in the roster of Titans that does this exact thing, Titanus Amulek. We have covered this Titan in the past extensively, and we'd like to think that Amulek almost paves the way for another kaiju to step into the franchise and do the exact same thing. But better. Amulek, if you didn't know, is really just a head, spinal cord, and nerves. That's it. The rest of its quote-unquote body is actually hardened, aberrated vegetation, such as vines or tree trunks manipulated by Amulek. There are no specifics as to how Amulek does this exactly, but it's likely that Amulek had some organ that manipulated something called gravitons. These are theoretical particles that carry gravity, almost how photons carry light. Space Godzilla and also Amulek can manipulate these to move things around. Except Space Godzilla takes it a bit further and can almost move anything, like these crystals and casually levitating Gojira, resulting in a highly disrespectful and humbling spectacle of titanic proportions. So it's safe to say that there is a really good chance that humanity will be witnessing physics warping phenomena in the surface world as well in the new movie, all thanks to Space Godzilla's cosmic biotechnology. But hold on, there's even more, and if you think that this was the limit of what Space Godzilla could be capable of in the monsterverse, then you might just be flat out wrong. Take a look at Space Godzilla's Corona Beam and tell us if you find something odd. Did you catch that? For those of you that didn't, note how Space Godzilla's beam actually curls around objects. Weaponized energy streams like these in the Monsterverse have not exhibited this yet. Ghidorah's gravity beams are irregular, but they tend to follow a relatively straight trajectory. Mechagodzilla's proton scream, Godzilla's atomic breath, and Shimo's frostbite blast also follow a straight line. Space Godzilla? Not so much. Why? Manipulating energy in such a controlled, curling trajectory would require forces or field control far beyond anything we can currently achieve. Funnily enough, during the creation of this video, something actually happened in real life that was also equally as bizarre, and with no real explanation at face value. Now, allegedly, a meteor was spotted that was changing directions abruptly, with some eyewitnesses claiming that this fireball-like object was zigzagging across the sky and changing directions as it was making its way towards the ground. Whether this was some sort of unknown craft caught on fire, some sick prank, or even AI, the fact of the matter is that an object hurled in a trajectory should not move aberrantly like this, and much less a beam of energy. Now, will Space Godzilla in the Monsterverse push the limits of what's grounded once again? This cinematic universe was at one time described as more grounded in comparison to the more whimsical treatment of the Heisei and Showa eras. However, lately, the Monsterverse is now straying from orbit. If you look at these two movies side by side, you'd have a hard time believing these two installments were in the same franchise. Lots has changed in terms of tonality, and if we keep moving in this direction, the fact that there's now a kaiju that can manipulate gravity on the surface world should not be surprising anymore. Space Godzilla's corona beams imply the following. Not only can Space Godzilla manipulate gravity, not that he actually changes the direction of light and energy, and not that he has an actual force field around him, but rather, Space Godzilla can bend the fabric of space in his vicinity. And this is actually a really big deal. So instead of blocking Godzilla's atomic breath, Space Godzilla could actually be creating a field where gravity is constantly shifting, causing attacks to curve or even miss completely. Projectiles fired at Space Godzilla could be hitting distorted space, potentially making this dude untouchable when it's exercising this ability. That's right, folks. If true, we are talking about the most powerful Titan of all time. In effect, this kaiju wouldn't really even need armor as we know it. Its protection could be control over space itself. Shocked? Well, we haven't even touched on its physical appearance yet. The appearance of Space Godzilla was meant to resemble the original Gojira in a way that it was depicted as the anti-type, the opposing force, with some concepts even having 4 arms. For Space Godzilla to be successfully depicted in the Monsterverse, some hallmarks have to remain. Coloration-wise, we will make an educated guess and say that the dark blue-gray coloration along with the purple-dark-red combo will likely remain, as well as predominantly white dorsal plates with a yellowish tone. Our base Godzilla model already looks a bit different, but we need to change more. A lot more. We can't have Space Godzilla without the massive shoulder crystals that served as amplifiers of energy. We'll go ahead and replace the original dorsal plates with crystals as well as a crystalline thagomizer similar to the one from the original Space Godzilla. Curved tusk-like structures on the side of its head, and the very recognizable space horn used as radar. Here's where it gets a little tricky, and we're about to fork in 2 different directions. Remember, this is just speculation, and rest assured, once the official design comes out, we'll be one of the first to try to recreate it in 3D. That's if this one isn't already accurate, so subscribe. Space Godzilla in the movie could fly using a crystalline encasement that levitated through space. This is where we're going to take a shot in the dark and say that this might not translate exactly as seen here, for one big reason. This. Now, some of you might see this and recall this from the 2021 film Godzilla vs. Kong's concept art. The novelization referred to this as Zosla Halawa, the Titan who ate a star, seen firing upon both Great Ape and Gojira. It really is unclear who this really is, since there is conflicting information in both novels and movies GVK and GXK. Hopefully GXK Supernova ties it all together to give us a definite answer. But the fact that we see a Gojira-type kaiju with wings makes us think that this Godzilla could possibly have 6 limbs, like some of the concept art used for Space Godzilla. Except instead of having 4 arms, it would be more like 2 large wings, 2 extended arms for better melee capabilities, and 2 legs. This would actually fit nicely with the idea that this new villain would be much more robust than Monsterverse Godzilla, one who has cut down on his weight recently. A flying creature of this magnitude and robustness would not only need exceptionally large wings, but also really large, wide chest muscles, stretching far wider than the G-Man's torso. These wings could also be crystalline in form, a magnificent display of doom dressed as cosmic power. Or Space Godzilla might not even need wings after all. Recall that we did mention that Space Godzilla does leverage other crystal-like structures to help it absorb energy, and perhaps to some extent provide some means by which he could warp space. As long as he's around these structures, Space Godzilla could at the very least leap further and make use of other supernatural abilities like the Photon Hurricane or sharp projectiles. So to conclude, this, ladies and gents, is our educated guess and just for fun take on how Space Godzilla could appear in the Monsterverse. Potentially the strongest, most dangerous Titan in existence so far.